All right, welcome. Welcome to my talk, which will not mention AI at all. Does anybody have a problem with that? Who's excited to not talk about AI anymore? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. All right, instead we're going to talk about SaaS. Disclaimer. You already heard about that. So my background, I do a podcast called Enterprise Security Weekly. I've been a defender. I've been a consultant, done pen testing. I was a PCI QSA. Then I was an industry analyst, so I wrote about the industry for a living. Then I started my own firm, which got acquired by a vendor, and I've been working for vendors on and off for a while. But mostly I write about the industry these days. I do some research around why breaches happen, why companies fail, and I do some consulting that leverages that research that I do. And yeah, so I've seen the industry from a bunch of different angles, and that's me. And you can Google me, find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find. I've got a hefty footprint on the internet. So how important is SaaS? Pretty important, right? So SaaS spending, this shouldn't be surprising, right? You know, cloud enables SaaS. Most of the SaaS that we use is built on cloud. So you would expect SaaS spend to be larger than cloud. And the total addressable market for cloud are people that build applications. You know, the total addressable market for SaaS is everyone that uses applications. So it's really everyone. So the big question here is, why do we have so much spend on cloud security and so little spend on SaaS security? Right? It seems a little imbalanced there. I think Wiz just announced a $1 billion round at a $12 billion valuation. You look at our biggest unicorns in cybersecurity, they're all cloud security vendors. So we do have SaaS security companies. It's a much more nascent, smaller market, but it is kind of surprising to me that cloud is so much bigger than SaaS here. And SaaS has arguably been around longer than cloud too. Without SaaS, we wouldn't have mobile apps, we wouldn't have Chromebooks. The state of applications today is really everything's web-based. Even the stuff on your phone, a lot of that's really web-based. It's using the same APIs, a lot of the same infrastructure. And so these days, SaaS is everywhere. Even the biggest laggards in the industry are probably using SaaS in some pretty big ways. I don't know how many companies are still running their own email servers, running their own calendaring systems. Mostly we're all in SaaS now. We're using Microsoft 365, Google Workspace is the center of our businesses and what we do. HR, CRM, pretty hard to come into a company and not find a lot of SaaS. Maybe you don't know about all of it, and that's going to be part of this. And it is the default for anything new that comes out. So a lot of the generative AI stuff that we're familiar with, even though you can do it offline, if you have a beefy system, you can roll your own with LLM models. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to mention AI, but this is the one exception, ChatGPT was the quickest product to 100 million users, and it's SaaS. So for the purpose of this talk, it gets a little bit confusing. A lot of people will use SaaS and cloud interchangeably, so I feel like I need to define that a little bit so we're clear in what we're talking about. So for the purpose of this talk, cloud is where you build your apps. Developers, engineers use cloud. SaaS is where your employees go to log into things and use the apps. So here's some examples. So just trying to make that clear, put a line between it. The line is pretty blurry though, right? Like if you go to console.aws.com or whatever the URL is, that is also SaaS, right? So you manage your cloud stuff through a SaaS-based API, SaaS-based UI. So it is a bit blurry. And there's some big similarities here. With SaaS, what you're paying for the convenience of getting up and running almost immediately. Most SaaS applications, you can be productive in minutes, right? You can just click log in with my corporate account, log in with Google, log in with Microsoft, whatever, and you're producing files, you're getting things done within 5 minutes in a lot of cases. So there's that shared responsibility model. You don't know how your data is being stored behind the scenes. You don't know where it's being stored. You don't care, right? What you care about is you got your project done that was due in an hour. Something you had to present in an hour, and that's the trade-off here. That's the convenience of SaaS. Also, with SaaS now, SaaS applications have gotten fairly complex. So there's a lot of interdependencies. It's very easy to integrate things. Maybe in the first 5 minutes after you create your SaaS account, you're linking it to your Google Drive, or you're linking it to OneDrive or Dropbox because it needs access to those files. So very quickly, SaaS can grow all these interdependencies, all these integrations and links to other things. And it can be really tough to map out. And then, mention a shadow IT activity here. Like I mentioned, it's very easy for somebody to sign up for SaaS, to create an account. In a lot of cases, those are employees. They're just trying to get work done, or their friend told them about this new presentation app, or this new app for creating diagrams. Notion, back in the day, it used to be Evernote. We find out people are just pumping corporate data into Evernote. What's Evernote? And all you had to have was a corporate email account, and all of a sudden your company, you'd find a CNAME, right? It'd be companyname.saasvendor.com. Your company would officially have an account there that any employee could start. They didn't talk to IT. Back in the old days, you wanted a new application, somebody had to give you resources. They had to find a server to install it on. Somebody would implement it. They'd set it up. They'd integrate it with Active Directory. Nowadays, they just click login with my corporate account, and boom, there it is. And so, some other differences. Cloud, significant learning curve, used by developers, engineers, as I mentioned. Significant learning curve, that's relative, of course, and little to no learning curve with SaaS. So again, SaaS is all about convenience, getting up and running quickly. Thanks to SaaS, you can start a business with so little capital today. We've seen a lot of bootstrap businesses. I've seen businesses built entirely around a website where they integrated Airbase into it. Anybody used the website layoffs.fyi to track layoffs or look at layoffs? It gets like millions of hits every month. And all it is Airbase, an Airbase spreadsheet, basically, integrated into a website. And you can have, I've seen companies pulling down millions of revenue, ARR, based off of Airbase integrated into a website. So, SaaS, you can do some very powerful things with it. And Airbase is, if you don't know what that is, it's basically a spreadsheet. Google Sheets on steroids, maybe. So SaaS security posture management, one of the many security posture management acronyms we have now. I think CSPM was probably the first one that we had that everybody's probably familiar with. Now it's part of platforms that we call CNAP. So SaaS security posture management, from the name, you can already probably draw some conclusions about what it's doing, but we'll jump into that. So in general, most security posture management tools scan what you have and tell you if you've got any problems. Like at its most basic level, they're going to hook into some APIs. Maybe you give it a login into something, and it's just going to pull in all your configuration information, maybe information about your data, and tell you if you have any problems. And DSPM is a little bit different. So we'll just leave that one out. So SSPM scans for, a lot of this, there's not a whole lot of feature parity between companies in this space yet, so they could be scanning for any of this stuff, but we'll talk about all the different things that they could possibly do. Not all of them do all of these things. Some of them may only do one of them. So configuration issues is the easy one here. Do you have MFA enabled? Is it being enforced? In a lot of places, those are two different things. You can have MFA enabled, but not enforced, meaning you're giving users the choice whether or not they want to use MFA. Just general configuration issues. You might have encryption options. You might have, in a lot of these SaaS applications, there could be hundreds of different options that have different bearing on access control, security of the app, who's allowed to do what within the app. In Teams, can I record a call? Can I trigger a recording that turns into a transcript, that maybe that third party I'm having the meeting with doesn't allow? So like that's a common example where I see, especially with Copilot now, some people locking down who has the ability to record a meeting or not. Because some of those third parties you're having meetings with might not be okay with that. Data sharing and exposure, this is a big one. The average company, we did some, at a previous company I worked for, we did some research and we found, I think generally 90% of your shared files you share from Dropbox, from OneDrive, from Google Drive, when you hit that share button, regardless of whether you share it with a single person or anyone with a link, 90% of those did idle. They're used once, they're shared once for a meeting, something you're going to reference during a meeting. Nobody ever goes back and unshares those, right? So they just kind of pile up over time. You have all these files shared. Nobody really knows who they're shared with, how long they're shared with those people, who has the links. Links can be copied and pasted into a text, into Teams, into Slack. Very easy to lose track of those links. And then third-party integrations. I mentioned this before, and this is a big one, right? Like, it's not just that somebody's using SaaS, but what is it hooked into? Does that SaaS have access to all that person's email, their calendar, all their files? In some cases, some of these SaaS apps, if they're installed by an administrator, somebody who's your Microsoft 365 admin or your, what do they call it, super admin or whatever on the Google side, have they given it access to, maybe they did a proof of concept of it once, right? And it's got access to everyone's email, the whole company's files, everyone's calendars, full control. And we see this all the time where, oh yeah, we did a proof of concept of that once, forgot to pull it out. It's still got access. Very common. So yeah, like a tenant level integration into your stuff. And there's a couple different philosophies here. So back when CASB, Cloud Application Security Brokers, which is now part of SASE platforms, or most of it is anyway, when that came out, it was very focused around discovery first. And this is, so neither of these philosophies are wrong. And we're going to talk about why you would go with one over the other. They're really just different use cases. So I think of the SaaS discovery, finding all your shadow IT. And what CASB's did is you could give them your firewall logs, your proxy logs, and they would scan through there and they would look for SaaS. And then they would give you a list of here's all the SaaS your users are using. Of course, back then, I guess that kind of worked because people were in a position where their traffic was being caught by proxies and firewalls. Maybe not as much anymore. A little bit harder to do with, if 60% of your workforce is remote. So there's some different approaches to this that companies are using now. But the positive of that is you get a list of all the SaaS, including the shadow SaaS in most cases, as long as they're using like a corporate email. Because what companies are doing today, companies like Nudge Security, Push Security, they actually get access, they request access to your email, and they're looking for the welcome email. So it seems kind of low tech, but that's how they figure out what SaaS you're using is they look for that, as soon as you sign up, send you a welcome email, welcome to Notion. They're looking for those emails, and that's how they build out that list. The downside is you get this super long tail of SaaS that you now have to prioritize. You have to decide, okay, now that we know within our company, 1,246 different SaaS applications are being used. What do we do with that? Do we throw it in a spreadsheet, prioritize it, sort it by number of people using that particular SaaS? Now you've got a lot of work on your hands. Is it better not to know? I don't know. So that brings me to the other philosophy, philosophy number 2, which is just focus on your biggest stuff first and work out from there. So by hooking into Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace, that's already where the core of all your company's data is, right? So, you can make a pretty good argument that I would want to know what's integrated with it. So I might still get a long tail, but it's an important long tail because these are the applications that have access to my files, my calendars, my emails, a lot of sensitive and proprietary information. So why not both? You could absolutely do both. It's pretty quick and easy and cheap to do the discovery piece of it. That was actually a free product that the Casbys gave away. They used that as a loss leader, as like a sales tool to show you how big the problem was and to bring you in to pay for the larger product. And then the other part, I think of is more about governance. A lot of this is about governance. We tried out a SaaS application once, decided not to use it. It still has permissions to everything. So that's governance. Let's that proof of concept, let's make sure it's shut down, it's removed, no longer has access. Anybody watch Andy Ellis's talk that you can't quantify risk yesterday? Yeah? Yeah, so he told me about his talk last night, and every place that I say risk in this presentation, I now wince. So maybe replace it in your mind with exposure or something like that. Just a side note. It's a good talk. So what does SSPM not do? So currently, and when I say SaaS security, SSPM is like a subset under that. You can have many things under SaaS security. So we also see, like Obsidian originally built more of a detection and response tool around SaaS, whereas most of the other companies went the, scan the configurations and find the problems route. So all that falls under what I think of as SaaS security. So SSPM is just a piece of that. So today we don't really see detection and response as much, but we're seeing more of that, right? Like cloud security's been around for a while, but we're just now starting to see cloud detection and response startups popping up. So that will eventually become part of that CNAPP platform, and just like that, we'll see SSPM become part of a larger platform where there's detection and response in addition to the governance piece of it. It doesn't do data discovery and classification, so most of these tools, while they can see that this spreadsheet, they can see the name of the file, they don't see the contents of the file. So most of the APIs are granular enough that you can say, okay, I need access to the file metadata, but not the file contents. And most startups don't want that anyway. They don't want your file contents anywhere near their infrastructure. They don't want that liability, they don't want that risk. So most SSPMs don't actually see the contents of your data. So DSPM is another category, and that's where they're focused. So there is some overlap with identity. So like I mentioned, they can tell you if, they can give you a list of users that have MFA enabled but not enforced, right? Things like that, but they're not gonna go deep into it like an identity solution would. We have identity threat detection and response is now a new category. It's might not do as much of the permissions reviewing, things like that. And then they're not inline. Generally, all this data is being pulled either with an account or over an API. So unlike a CASB, something that uses a forward proxy or reverse proxy, they can't actually make changes in real time. Like a CASB, you could say, I want my people to be able to use the SaaS tool, but not the chat function. And literally, it's just deleting JavaScript in real time as it comes through, editing that in real time. Or I want to give a pop-up or something like that. So these tools can't do that. All right, so I mentioned CASB. This is, I was jokingly referring to this category SSPM for a while as CASB version 2. We often see this in security where, the idea is solid, of what we want to do with this technology, but maybe the implementation isn't the best. And in hindsight, reverse proxies were kind of a hot mess. You know, if Salesforce changed any part of how their application worked, my reverse proxy through my CASB would then break. You know, we had to keep up with that because they're rewriting the URLs, so every single URL on the SaaS app had to be rewritten by the CASB. And you're basically going through the CASB first and then to that. And they'd use a trick with SAML to be able to redirect through them. And you could do some very cool stuff with it, but very easy for it to break and very onerous, only worked with certain sites. You had to have SAML support to be able to make it work. You know, then there were some forward proxies and things like that, but generally it was disruptive. Didn't really catch on as much as people were hoping, and so even CASB's pivoted pretty quickly to using APIs because APIs are out of band, it was low risk, didn't break things, and not disrupting users, not breaking Salesforce in the middle of the week for users. Pretty important. So yeah, SSPM has always been API based. Doesn't really have a whole lot of overlap with CASBs. CASBs still exist. You know, it's like I mentioned, it's a feature within SASE or SSE, and there's other use cases, other things you can do with CASBs. You know, so you could potentially have an SSPM and a CASB and get value out of both of them. You know, even though there's, it sounds like they do the same thing, there's not as much overlap as you'd think. All right, so SaaS challenges. You know, the name of this talk is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And it's, for security, it's actually been great. You know, if we're using SaaS apps for things, we don't have to have VPNs out on the public internet, which apparently is a problem. It's been a problem in the last couple of years. Hanging a VPN out is more risky than it's really worth. So people can do work from anywhere. Really helped us out during the pandemic. To continue to get work done. And yeah, really most of it's the speed and convenience. And we do get some security benefit out of that. We no longer have to backhaul employee traffic through a data center or something like that for them to be able to get work done. And the 1 step back, of course, is if you have 1,241 SaaS apps, you do that SaaS discovery process. Yeah, you don't have a whole lot of visibility or control over all that. And I mentioned complexity here. Salesforce has 45 APIs. Each API can have dozens of endpoints. Each endpoint can have hundreds of methods and parameters. It's a lot. Zoom, before the pandemic, was meeting software. Now it's like a Microsoft 365 competitor. They got email, they got calendar. There's a whole marketplace of integrations that you can plug into it. You know, you join a meeting today and somebody's got some, I'm sorry, again, some AI bot, transcribing the meeting. So that happened really quickly. Zoom grew very quickly into a different product. And that is one of the key problems here, is to keep track of everything that the SaaS does. Today, it does these 45 things. Tomorrow, it could do 60 things. You know, it gets updated without your knowledge. How do you keep track of what it does, of what it's connected to, of what it's capable of? And even simple integrations can be big risks. If you're using something like Zapier, great for automating things, you know, but the employee who created this automation between HubSpot, Slack, and Google Sheets, you know, did they connect it to their corporate Google Sheets or their personal Google Sheets? Really easy to mix those up. And why isn't security prioritized by SaaS vendors? That's not what sells software. You know, reducing friction, getting people up and running as quickly as possible, helping them get ready for that meeting they have in an hour by allowing them to sign up, figure out how to use the product, get whatever they needed done in such a short time. Security doesn't help you do any of that. You know, so of course it's going to be an afterthought here. We want to get people onboarded, using the product as quickly as possible. Most SaaS is VC funded, so growth at all costs over anything else. All the incentives here are for speed over security. Excuse me. So yeah, you can think of this as growth first instead of security first. Except for Microsoft, who says they're doing the opposite now. They had a little nudge there from the CISA and the CSRB. So de-risking SaaS, we've been talking about SSPM here and what it can do. So one of the things I think could be useful, and we've seen this happen over the years. You know, I think there are some companies that have some of these things. So, you know, these aren't hard and fast. I could be wrong on some of these, but it would be good to have some idea of the reputation of the vendor. You know, did they have a SOC 2, that kind of thing. It would be nice if their website or if some of these companies would tell you the general reputation of the SaaS vendor. But there's so many of them. That's the big challenge here. How secure is the app? Do they have SSO? Do they support SAML? Do they provide me with logs? How much visibility do they give me into the SaaS application? Most SSPMs aren't going to tell you that. I think they easily could move into that, and I think that would be a great feature. But again, they'd have to build a research team. That research team is constantly going through all these different SaaS apps, trying to keep up with all the new features and things like that. That would be pretty challenging to maintain that database of all the security features, enterprise features that some of these apps have. So certainly, how much risk does the app introduce? We can do a lot of that, whether or not it has enterprise features. SSPMs can do some of that. And then how the business is planning to use it. So I worked for a SaaS security company last year, and they had a feature where if we saw a new SaaS app integrated with something like Microsoft 365, you could send out an email and say, hey, we saw you're using a new SaaS app. What are you using it for? And you could actually prompt them for some information. So it's a nice little automation where you can maybe gather some due diligence, you know, get a business justification from somebody that's just onboarded a new SaaS app. Who owns it? So that's the fun thing about SaaS, right? IT is no longer the owner of software in the organization. You know, maybe HR doesn't need any help from IT. You know, they own their own SaaS app. You know, each department has their own niche SaaS apps that they might use, and IT is no longer involved in that process in a lot of cases. You know, they decide what software they need. They do their own proof of concepts. They manage the software themselves, maybe even user accounts and access to things. So now every department has their own kind of, you know, shadow IT or pseudo IT within it, because they know how these apps work. They know what features they need and how it needs to work. Maybe they have to talk to IT to integrate it with other things. Maybe they need some help. You know, if for HR, you know, a function of it is putting job postings on a website, so they need somebody to integrate the website piece or register a domain or something like that. But generally, they don't need IT anymore to onboard new applications. So that's a big question. So again, that goes to the asset management piece of this. Who owns it? You know, you've discovered these 1,241 apps. Who owns each of them? And maybe they don't even feel that sense of ownership. Like it doesn't even occur to them that they are a software asset owner. You know, so that's something that we have to work on, and you know, just encourages good communication, right? You know, we're kind of forced to have good communication between departments now. So we're going to talk about some SaaS attacks. They're not super common, but they absolutely happen. We've actually seen some really big ones, particularly around info stealers. Because when was the last time you had to re-log into Slack and it wasn't you having a new laptop, right? Or you have to re-log into your mail application. You know, everything just stays logged in, you know, particularly on your phone. You log in once and you stay logged in forever, right? So that's because you've got an OAuth key, some kind of credential, some kind of token is being stored on the device. Bad guys know this, so info stealers are a category of malware that do nothing but scoop up all that stuff, and they post it on marketplaces. And because that token includes your login information, so your corporate email address, you know, they can now put it up on this page and say, so-and-so at acme.com, I've got a login for their Slack for Acme, for this company. and they can offer up on these black market sites access into these different companies. And cred stuffing, also key way of getting into SaaS. There are scripts and services out there where you can take a username and a password and it'll try and log into 700 different sites and it'll tell you which ones it worked for. So they make it very easy to take a set of credentials and figure out where it works. And then accidental oversharing, we've seen some breaches because of that, because people don't understand exactly what they're sharing or how they're sharing it or whether or not it's going to be discoverable. Is a Google crawler going to find this information that they shared? Like I mentioned Notion a lot. I've seen companies use Notion as their knowledge support database. With just like 2 clicks, you can take an entire directory of Notion notes, which it's like OneNote or Evernote if you've ever used any of these applications, and just turn it into a website. You know, just 2 clicks, boom, all that stuff is published on the public internet. Now it's searchable. Google's going to return it in search results. A lot of people don't realize that they're doing that. So one example here, a Circle CI breach. So we've seen a lot of these breaches where basically an engineer or a developer goes to install an application, turns out to be malware. I think one of these cases it was OBS, the broadcasting software, open source broadcasting software. Google was actually serving up AdWords, like sponsored links of malware for OBS for a while, before they finally pulled them down. And yeah, once that malware's on there, stealing all the tokens and direct access into, because it's not just the OAuth keys, right? Like if I'm on an engineer or developer's machine, I also want to look for any code they have there, any AWS keys, any access to cloud as well. So it's not just going to scan your browser cookies, but these info stealers will also look for SSH keys. Any place a developer might have credentials or secrets, this malware knows where to search for that. So yeah, the lessons here. Still today, it's amazing to me that you can just take a key off somebody's machine, put it onto another machine, and you're logged in as them. There's no MFA anymore. There's no login process. Boom, you're just there. You're just logged in. And we'll talk about the future of that. Google is working on making that not the case. So yeah, in most cases, OAuth keys are portable. And detection's tough because this is another one of those cases where the attacker isn't hacking in, they're logging in, which is a bit harder to detect. Another interesting case, Drizzly. This is a case where they had a one-day hackathon. And to participate in the hackathon, you needed access to the company's GitHub. And so an executive didn't have access to the GitHub, so they gave him access. He didn't have MFA, he had a terrible password. And after that one-day hackathon, they never shut it down, that his access remained. He left the company, the account was not shut down, so some clear governance issues here. Account was not removed after he left. And this account got cred stuffed years later. Drizzly had a big breach. Is it the SEC? Yeah, the FTC or the SEC did an investigation, find them. The CEO of Drizzly has special security things he has to do for the rest of his career because of this. He is personally sanctioned as a result of this breach for the next 20 years of his career, which is basically the rest of his career, regardless of what company he works for. So yeah, lessons here. Why not create a one-day credential? Set an expiration date at the end of the hackathon. Give everybody credentials just for the hackathon and expired at the end of the day. Problem solved. And then there should have been reviews that showed, hey, we've got an account from somebody who no longer works here. It's a 7-character password. That's terrible. So password reviews, account reviews, all kinds of cleanup processes. There's no MFA enabled on this thing. So Drizzly couldn't have been doing any of this just basic governance stuff for this to have hung out there that long. Or maybe they were, but just not across GitHub. Maybe GitHub was being left out of that. Microsoft had part of their AI research team were publishing stuff publicly on GitHub, not realizing how to use Azure buckets. They thought they were sharing a single file, an AI model. Sorry again, it just shows up everywhere. And they just happened to be putting unencrypted PC backups in that same bucket. I don't know why. I don't know why you would mix the two things. If I'm imagining how this might happen, maybe they were mapping a drive to the Azure bucket or something like that, and it was just a convenient place to put their backups. But you could read their team messages, you could get their OAuth keys, like everything was exposed in there. So that was, I think, more of a UI UX issue. And data hygiene is really hard. You know, it's people put stuff in weird places. It's hard to keep track of data. This is a really tough one. You know, this is something where you have to be scanning for data, making sure people aren't putting stuff in weird places. Not an easy problem to solve. That's more of a DSPM issue. And in the Microsoft Storm breach, this was a really interesting one because, so on the detection response part of SaaS, the State Department actually detected this attack because they paid for the premium logs. Nobody else paid for the premium logs, apparently not Microsoft either, because they were the only ones that detected the attack. And they had some really good detection engineering set up. This is all, if you read the CSRB report, the Cyber Safety Review Board report on this Microsoft breach. A lot of good details in there. And yeah, when you onboard SaaS, you know, do you have access to those logs? What do those logs tell you? You know, do they tell you enough to be able to detect these kinds of attacks? Many, many years ago, one of the early CASB companies discovered that there were cybercriminal groups getting access to people's Salesforce and just downloading the entire Salesforce instance, like all the data. And Salesforce didn't know this was happening. You know, so they weren't alerting customers that it was happening. But the customers didn't have the logs to be able to tell that it was happening. You know, so this is one of those questions in this shared responsibility model. You know, customer thinks, oh, Salesforce would tell me if somebody's attacking my data on their systems. And Salesforce doesn't realize it's happening. So both sides think the other's responsible here. And I think it's best to assume that they're not doing that for you, that you're gonna have to do that yourself. You know, so that's a good question to ask. You know, what logs do I get? Do I have to pay extra for those logs? And what do they tell me? So would SSPM have helped in some of these? No, for most of them. Drizzly, easy. That Drizzly case, that was a governance case. Easy for SSPM to solve that problem. And it's an important problem to solve. Yeah, so I've been harping on this already. First and foremost, SSPM is really about governance. Visibility into what's going on, how your people are using these tools. If you do a POC of one of these products, you will be shocked at the amount of data shared. Again, from some of our research data, I think it was 30 shares per employee was the average that we found. Or what did I say, 30? 70 shares per employee. And so a company, you know, company with 2,000 employees had like 900,000 file shares. And like I said, at the highest point, one of them, 99% of them had not been accessed in 90 days. You know, so they just all needed to be removed. So the future of SSPM, as I mentioned, I expect it to be rolled up into platforms, just like everything else is getting rolled up. Palo Alto will probably have one of these. I expect it to go into SASE platforms because those are already kind of building together security tools that are between the employee and applications. So that's where I expect it to go. It wouldn't make as much sense for it to go into companies like Wiz and Orca, companies like that, because that's more on the cloud side of things, you know, developers, engineers. And yeah, I think this the need for this kind of exists forever because this challenge continues. SaaS continues to pop up. People are going to continue to start using them. We need some way to know that this is happening, and we need some tooling to help us assess each of these SaaS applications. You know, what risks did they pose? How are people using them? What data is flowing through them? You know, particularly when regulation comes in here, keeping track of data when, you know, SaaS can be adopted this easily and integrated with all the different places we're storing our data. We're going to have something that does this. I don't know where it lives long term. Probably be part of your Microsoft 365 subscription or security add-on at some point. It'll definitely be integrated into something, but but yeah, it'll. I don't see this going away anytime soon. All right, so wrapping up. So yeah, the $10 billion TAM question, do you need SSPM right now? Yeah, I think if your company's SaaS first, cloud first, kind of a must have. You know, that should be pretty high on your list. If you've got FTP servers and VPN endpoints on the public internet, maybe a little bit lower. Maybe you should worry about those first and get rid of those and find other ways for people to access your infrastructure. Maybe look into ZTNA and cloud file storage. So yeah, if you've got a mix of cloud, SaaS, and traditional infrastructure, I think this will be a little bit lower on the priority list. But I do think pretty much everybody should do the discovery piece. It's going to be scary, but you should know what employees are using, potentially putting corporate data into, you know, how far that spread goes. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it's pretty cheap and easy. You know, I think this is kind of a no-brainer to do this at some level. A lot of different ways of doing it. You know, I don't like the idea of the ones that do SaaS discovery by getting read access to all my email. I mean, it's a really solid way of doing it, you know, but do they really need access to all my email? So a little bit less comfortable with that, but that's not the only way to do the SaaS discovery piece. And then it can be a lot of fun to POC and SSPM and see how many millions of file shares you have, you know, where those file shares are going. And, you know, on top of that, I think in 100% of the cases I've seen, companies thought they had MFA enabled 100% across the board, and not one of them actually did. You know, so that it will reveal some gaps there. And is that worth paying for the whole solution? You know, or is that something you fix once? I don't know. You know, that's something you've got to decide yourself. But it can find some pretty interesting stuff. Yeah, SSPM is a lot deeper. Really, I think at this point does require some kind of tool with rules to find all these things. You know, this is going to be pretty tough to do by hand. There are companies out there, larger companies, building this stuff in-house. You know, all the APIs are there. You know, you could do it yourself if you have a big dev team to throw at this. But I think if you're considering that, you know, the SSPM products out there, you know, make sense financially, you know, versus having to build it yourself. Also, before getting it, also look into identity threat detection response tools, identity security posture management tools, there's a bunch of tools. They all overlap at this point. They will all be smushed together and combined and end up in a platform 3 or 4 years from now, but that hasn't happened yet. So if you're looking at one now, I'd recommend looking at some of the adjacent categories. And that's it, question time. Or heckling. Anything you got? We got 2 microphones here. Slides are so good, I answered all the questions. anticipated everything.
Hi there. So something that you had talked about before really resonated about how so many different departments own their own assets, and they don't know they're the asset owner and don't understand truly the responsibility of that. And something I've been actually fighting and working with various departments.
You got to give them the Uncle Ben speech.
So what?
The Uncle Ben speech.
I haven't. I'm not really at that confidence level to do that. But how would you go about trying to bridge that gap when the communication lines, like there's a lot of non-starters for some of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that has to happen at the leadership level. That's really tough to do from the lower levels. Like that. I don't know what you have to offer them, right?
Right.
You know, so that's something where, you know, the CIO, you know, and the CISO, like they all need to talk and say, hey, you guys are managing your own software. Like, we need some visibility into that. You know, we need security needs to be involved in that. You know, there's risk we can't see, manage, understand.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's I don't see it working unless it's coming from the top down into those departments.
That's what I thought. Thanks.
If you want to be successful, that's the answer. I'm sorry, it's not an easy one.
Hi. So I kind of work at the lower level with some teams that manage the SaaS products for our organization. So I probably don't have the power to bring in an SSPM right away. What would be your advice to the teams managing a SaaS, like administrating a SaaS product for a company today, to make sure that they're kind of on the ball with the stuff you mentioned today?
Yeah, so honestly, like a lot of the SaaS products have documentation, you know, so like being aware of all the options, you know, all the things that you can do with it. So you're talking without buying a tool, right? Yeah, so, you know, if you look at the websites for the tools, you can get an idea of the general list of things that they'll check for. So that'll give you kind of a checklist. You can just scrape that off the SSPM vendors' websites. And that'll give you an idea of what you should be looking at. And then, you know, especially if you have a handful of really big ones that you're concerned about, you know, you can put together that checklist yourself, write some scripts. You know, we find a lot of people, especially in the Google side of things, I forget the Google scripting language that you use with the Google Workspace, but we see a lot of companies getting a lot of value out of those. Cool. And yeah, just scripting it to pull back like the list of shared files, you know, account details, and, you know, making sure everything's enabled that should be, those kinds of things.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you.